Welcome to Hot Springs Village Inside Out, a weekly podcast where Hot Springs Village, Arkansas is the star. Join me, Randy Cantrell, and my co-host Dennis Simpson as we discuss the history, facts, people, places, events, lots more surrounding Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. Visit the website at hotspringsvillageinsideout.com.
Hey, it's time for another episode of Hot Springs Village Inside Out, or hsvinsideout.com, with my good buddy, Mr. Randy Cantrell. In Dallas, I'm here in Hot Springs Village. I am not by the lake because I am by the lake, but I can't show you the lake behind me because I keep getting washed out. So
yeah, the lake trumps you.
In every way. As Teresa Diane, my lovely wife, says, you have a face for radio, Dennis. So,
me too.
When you drag me onto video, I'm like, okay, Randy, okay.
No, but you're for the audio audience, you're gonna have to check out the YouTube channel because he looks perfectly human today. Well,
yeah, very human. I think that's a good. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Fatally human, probably.
All right, I've asked you to dive into a topic that I know you're eminently qualified for, because as the outsider who hopes to one day be an insider, Lord willing, and we're working on it. I had strong interest. I came last year during the pandemic, and I know it was the 50th anniversary of the place. And I began to look a little bit about the history of the place because I had no idea about the beginnings of the place. So that's what we hope to talk about today. And I reserve the right to have questions.
Please.
Along the way.
Please. Lots of questions. In late 1969, Mr. John A. Cooper I, who was a West Memphis attorney, who by his own admission said that he wasn't that great an attorney, and he knew he really wouldn't get rich making, being in the courtroom, but he thought that he could use some of his abilities in land title services and land stuff. And he had already by 69, you have to pardon me with my sinuses today, but he had already by 1969, he had already had Cherokee Village in Northwest Arkansas by Harris Brake and some areas there. And they built it across the county line, just like they did Hot Springs Village, two different counties. They had some small lakes, but by Mr. Cooper's own admission too, they made some significant mistakes. What they would do is they would perimeter, they would take the entire land that was around that and say, okay, so this is the development inside that. Well, they had no gates. And that's the one thing of all the Cooper developments that delineates the village and the size of it. But they had no gates whatsoever. So you would buy a beautiful lot on one side of the street, and on the other side of the street, there would be a dead trailer with a dead car in the yard and 4 barking dogs. So in one side, you had kind of a resort life. And on the other side of the street, literally the street behind it that bordered the building that didn't have any access, but you looked out the back door and there were mobile homes, dead mobile homes. And it just wasn't as attractive. And he realized he had to contain the environment more. He contacted the fine folks with Dirk's Timber, and they actually did a flyover of this area with State Senator Bud Canada at the time. Great guy, a lot of vision. And I'll tell you, before we move another inch, that's one of the things that you have to respect. The place that I'm sitting and the first 16 miles did not know what a computer was. They didn't know what a fax machine was that didn't spin on a drum. Okay. Right. They did all this without that, all of this. I asked a lady one time at the water treatment or the water office. I said, who designed all the roads out here? She said it was 2 guys. One was named Curvy and one was named Lefty. And anyway, good joke. But there are a lot of curves, a lot of area, but they were interviewing the Dirk's Timber Company, and the Dirk's Timber Company owned land from, and I'm making this gesture, back near Lonsdale, probably another 15 aerial miles to 20 miles to nearly 65 miles inside of what Dirk's called the IT, which was the Indian Territory / Oklahoma before it was a state. And Dirk's had millions of acres. Now, I'm referring to Don Dirks's book that talks about this, who's a great guy, wonderful. He actually came on the board when as Mr. Cooper was driving down, Cooper and his associates were driving down today what was a logging road and is today DeSoto. They had looked at all this land, and finally one of the guys said, what's wrong with right here? I mean, this looks okay. And one of them was like, yeah, well, I mean, just outside the gate where Cranford's now sits was the office for Dirk's Timber Company for 100 miles, literally. And Dirk's Timber had such wide-ranging assets. There's actually a little town in Arkansas called Dirk's, and the reason they called that, and I may have mentioned this before, they were actually cutting a railroad through there to bring out some logs. And as they're cutting the railroad, they cut an embankment. As they cut the embankment, they noticed just a wall of gypsum. Anybody know what gypsum is, Randy? Yeah, a knowing grin. Yep.
Yeah, sheetrock.
At the time, if you're making lumber, a lot of times you're going to need sheetrock. And so they literally developed a sheetrock plant there. This was one of the largest growing concerns in the village, in the area, by far and away. And their offices were just outside what is now the main gate. Well, they took an option to buy the first 14,000 acres of the 26,000 acres that there are. And I've tried to paint this picture a dozen times, and I just don't know how successful I'm going to be. This is where maybe the questions come in, Randy. Imagine up and down Highway 7, there's not a hibachi, there's not a Mexican restaurant, there's not a Walgreens, there's not a Cranford's, there's not a grocery store, there's not a Walmart. There is, however, at the very, very, very bottom of the hill, a place that's been there for 125 years, which is Mountain Valley Water. So this area was just unknown, literally unknown. As a matter of fact, and if we can do an entire episode on this, is you go just on north of the west entrance of the village, go up just as you would get up to Jesseville, pretty much from there, about halfway into the village, is what's known as the Dark Corner. The last known still, moonshine still, was pulled out in 1998. They had submarine pots. They had it was not uncommon if Capone or any of the guys got in trouble when they were in Hot Springs, they would come up to the Dark Corner and hang out there until, things calmed down a little or settled down, or they went back to Chicago or whatever. But they have huge submarine pots, and they would bring it to the Hot Springs depot, and Mr. Capone would put it in his car and ship it back. His car would be on the train, and they would ship it all back together. Well,
and called the Dark Corner because
it's the dark corner of Garland County. It's right at the very, very top of Garland County. And I've made this note before because I've lived in some pretty rural places. The further you get from city governance and from the federal government, and as soon as you get toward the border of a state, things get kind of iffy, And part of the story is, and I love the story of the national park too, which is the national park and forest, which is part of our story. Well, one of the beauties here is that we overlook this national forest of 1.7 million acres that goes about 85 miles into to Oklahoma. And anyway, I digress, but the Dirks set up a contract and they said, we're going to sell you this on contract because we're out here in the middle of nowhere and you're going to bring in thousands of people. Oh, this is going to be great. And you're going to give them a tour. Where are they going to stay? What are they going to eat? Where do you, literally questions as simple as, where will you get your mail?
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're starting from zero. Zero. Anyway, so they sold the first 16,000 acres on contract to Mr. Cooper with the condition that when you cut down a tree on the lake, like behind me, or the golf course, or make a road, we can buy that tree back from you. Oh, that's a great idea. Well, I mean, for Cooper, they didn't care. It didn't matter to Cooper how old the trees were at that time. Okay. Now we're talking, as you said, 50 years ago, right? So we're just starting that 50-year period. And if you look around, if you'd seen some of our other videos, a lot of the trees here are about 35 to 50 years. Well, that's how old the trees were when they bought it. And Cooper, when they had clear cut it back in the 20s, and they wanted all that timber to grow back, and they were really interested in recouping that loss and not losing all those growing years. So they did. So Cooper moved in, and Mr. John A. Cooper is in the Arkansas Business Hall of Fame for what, Randy?
I have no idea.
Mr. Cooper is in the Arkansas Business Hall of Fame for inventing the 3-day, 2-night, 90-minute staycation.
Yeah. Yep. Would have never guessed that. There you go.
Yep. Well, and just to fill in the blank real quick, Anyway, so Mr. Cooper bought that first 16,000 acres, started this idea he had that he started in Horseshoe Bend or in Cherokee Village of giving a 90-minute tour for a 3-day, 2-night vacation. It was never a 90-minute tour, and it was never quite 3 nights and 2 days either. But, you get the picture. You get the picture.
Yeah, P.T. Barnum.
And he had brought a lot of people in from Memphis, a lot of people in from Springfield and areas around to the area of Cherokee Village. And he thought he could do the same thing here. Well, that's a great idea. And they're going to start building. And there was a building just as soon as you came in where the Crocus food truck has been. But there's a building as soon as you came in on the left-hand side, there was a large building there. And that was the POA and the Cooper building for decades. It was just recently torn down this last couple of years. But they would bring people in and give them on the tours and whatever. And Mr. Cooper actually bought, if you know where the Vapors is downtown.
Yeah.
Right beside that, there's the Velda Rose Hotel. And he bought the Velda Rose Hotel and Motel. He would keep people up there. They would send a salesman down. He would ride up with them, tell them how great it was both ways. And if you didn't like it, you still had to ride 30 minutes with him back down and whatever. Right. But they typically started opening up and they started selling lots. Now, that's a great idea and it's a great day. But I mean, I'm sitting here looking at a 210-acre lake that did not exist.
Right.
So the salesmen were like, here's where the golf course will be. And here's where the lake will be. And we're building one building. And can we have your check for $5,000? Do what? What? Mm-hmm. Now, right at 6 months after they sold the land from Dirks to Cooper, Dirks was bought out by the Weyerhaeuser Corporation, which you may have heard of.
Yes.
Yeah, just a little.
Yeah, tiny. Yeah.
They honored those agreements, but that other 12,000 acres on the other side, they clear cut it and they replanted it in pines. So here's what you're going to see from the very west gate, and I'm doing it backwards for y'all, sorry, but from the very west gate to Balboa Road, where the Woodlands Entertainment Center is, right there, and where the park is and all that. From 1990 to 1970 is inside those windows. There is nothing beyond Balboa Road. There's nothing beyond that way that has not been built since 1990.
Okay, well, that explains the pine trees on the east side then.
It really does. And a lot of people, I mean, when we have a fall here, and one of our other guests had mentioned this, but the fall here is fantastic because we have evergreens, we have cedars and pines, right. And then we have sweet gums that just go off in crazy colors. And then we have everything in between, hickories and elms and oaks and whatever. On the east end, you don't see that so much. It's more of a pine plantation. Yeah. Now, it didn't happen right at Balboa Road. It actually happened about halfway down Balboa Lake, where you get down to Ponce de Leon Golf Course, right. And all those areas. Right. But in that time frame, so from 1970 when they began to 1990 at Balboa Road, they developed Balboa Golf Course down below that, and then they developed Coronado Golf Course. At one time, I have an ashtray. I should go get it and show you. I have an ashtray because when you took the tour, they gave you an ashtray because everybody needed an ashtray at that time. I don't know if you know, that was ubiquitous. You know, how are you going to get cancer if you don't get an ashtray, right? Yeah. So they would give away these little ashtrays. The first one went roughly from the DeSoto Beach, which is quarter mile that way, to the very edge of the village. And it was a little square plate about like this. Yeah. Well, then they started out getting little short, squatty ones because they had so much stuff to put on them. Right. But they had the Allegra subdivision. They had the Valina, these hills back behind us that have magnificent views out over the Ouachitas. They started making little smaller plates, and down in the bottom, it would say proposed Ponce de Leon Golf Course, right on top of where the Balboa Golf Course is now. Okay. So they didn't, it wasn't a perfect plan to begin with. They worked it as they went, you know. Interesting. Now the oldest existing house in there now would be 50 years old. 51 years. And exactly. And as you would imagine, as soon as you come in the gate, you can turn right and go up Valina. Uh-huh. But literally, even before you get there, there's a little bitty road that goes down to the left, which now kind of goes down behind the hardware store because there wasn't a hardware store at that time. But it would go down that hill behind them. That's where the oldest homes are. And those homes are not on the golf course. The next street over to the east, just a little, is the first one that was on the golf course. But they were building that golf course till 1972, 73. And I want to go back because I addressed this on some social media not too long ago. A lot of people ask about the POA. And I have, as a guy who's been here for 20 years or bought and sold here for 20 years and lived here for 10 years, I've seen the POA be a municipality, which they kind of are, but they're chartered as a corporation. So just a not-for-profit corporation. And it's very important to understand what really, how we got there. Okay. And that is that we have Cooper, who is at one point, they said they were spending a third of every dollar on marketing. Okay. They sell a $10,000 lot. That lot cost them $3,300 to market. We drove you here. We flew you here. We gave you a 90-minute tour. We put you up at the Vel de Rose. We, gave you a coupon, whatever it took, to get you here.
Well, and at that point, you're selling a dream,
Yeah. Well, and he played that card before everybody. I mean, that's the classic timeshare deal now, right?
Yeah, right.
But at the time, that was new and novel, and the closing line that the salesmen were using. Randy, look, would you like to have a lot like this in Dallas? That wouldn't it be nice to have a lot like this on the lake in Dallas? What would this cost in Dallas?
Right.
Well, $250,000, Dennis, $250,000. Well, number one, you're not in Dallas,
right?
Then it's not going to be $250,000.
Yeah.
So there. But they gave a lot of tours, and actually, the guy who did Designing Women, Bledsoe Thomas, he and his wife,
right.
Yeah, he hired helicopters and flew over the place, edited in these beautiful sweeping sounds and motions as you're going down the golf course, as only you can in a $400 an hour helicopter at the time, right? Nobody had a drone, so as Mr. Cooper's bringing all these people in, he actually has the building at the far west end that was just there till a couple of years ago. And, Joe Blow would be brave, and I do mean brave, and build, at the time, a $40,000 or $50,000 here on the lake that's supposed to be here, on the golf course that's going to be here, beside the Fay Jones building that's going to be here, who was an architect who studied under Frank Lloyd Wright. And so as you come in the village, there's this big metal sculpture. Well, Fay Jones designed that in the new traditional style, or in the, what they call it, Art Deco.
Yeah.
Just like the Coronado, just like the DeSoto Club is. And it was a club. It was a country club environment. That's where a lot of things really spun for a long time. But let's say that I'm having trouble getting my trash picked up. Pick up the phone, I call Cooper, and Cooper goes, we're trying to sell lots and build a big development. We're not really in the mood to fix your trash problem. I got an idea. Let's turn that over to the POA. So one end of the building was literally the sales office, and the other end was the POA. So when somebody came in and said, I want to buy a lot, the POA would say, down that way. And when somebody came in and said, I got a problem, he would say, down that way. So they literally were in the same building. And one of the discussions is, and I've got to look it up, the POA was not formed at the exact time that the village was started. It was formed a couple of years later, and as things were. And I've mentioned this before, and I want to, for those that are listening inside the village and paying attention, one of the issues was, even 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the POA board came in and rubber stamped whatever Cooper said, because Cooper was spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to bring people in. In 2006, before they left, they were still developing Granada Golf Course, and they hadn't finalized and released it yet. But they got to where it became a working system that every time they got a major asset in place, they would hand that back to the POA. Well, hey, look, we want this beautiful lake, but I've got a little algae in my lake. What do I do? Well, that's a POA problem. And that continued really actually until 2010, when we had some other problems at Lake Granada and Lake Estrella, where we had algae blooms. All of that to say, everything lived inside that one building for probably 20, 25 years. Now, as you came out to what we now would call, jokingly, the four-way stop, which is true, you would turn left, and that's Colella, and you would go north up Colella. Well, immediately to the left, there's a Shell station. Immediately to the right, there was a couple of banks. And just to the left of that, there's a liquor store now, but that was where the post office and the grocery store was. And it was at best a 7-Eleven type environment. They didn't have every kind of pistachio nuts you might ever want. They just had some groceries,
right?
And it was pretty much that way. If you realize that DeSoto Lake and golf course were built about the same time, but that would be in 71 to 74, 73 kind of deal. And then we moved over to Lake Cortez and Cortez Golf Course, which were finalized in 78 and 79.
Now Cooper's big idea. Okay, to have this development, but was he a home builder? Was he wanting to build homes in here? Was he just wanting to sell lots? What was the game plan there for him?
You asked the question that I should have been answering, and that's, yeah. Cooper was an entrepreneur, obviously, and he knew how to get houses built, and he made good money on houses. But he also realized it was a lot like the gold miner scenario, that if you owned the building that the post office sat in, that was a good profit income too. If you owned where the Walmart, where the Walgreens is, the Village Hibachi, all that, all of that's Cooper. Cooper owns all that land.
Oh, okay. Where
Cranford sits, Cooper owns that land. So, but he wanted to integrate it, and so he basically started a concrete company, which is still running today. And I've had somebody tell me that the concrete company was actually the most profitable part of anything. But they had a whole set of builders and crews so they could strategically do. And every time it came up for deer season, they let their guys go and paid them during deer season, which was unheard of at the time, because I want to paint the picture again. Now, some people think we're a little remote now. 50 years ago, this was nowhere. There was nothing here.
Yeah, literal wilderness.
Exactly. You didn't want your subs wandering off during winter time.
Right. Yeah.
So you made absolutely sure that they were available.
Right.
So he treated his subs really good, but they have Cooper Communities, which is who own land now. They had Cooper Home, they had Cooper Land Development, they had Cooper Concrete, and there was one other I'm forgetting, but he made a whole myriad of these. But
so the strategy was to sell you a lot and then hope to persuade you to build on that lot.
Exactly.
But was it a country club-ish thing? Was it a retirement thing? Was it?
In the beginning, one of the appeals is that it was a country club type thing.
Okay.
And that's where the DeSoto Club really came in. And even back in the 90s, they were pushing the country club aspect again when they opened the Balboa golf course, which is a 25,000 square foot building that's virtually unused now. But that was at a more, pardon the term, a more social time.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then after that, they went ahead and made the Granada. If anything that would look like a golf club, a country club, they kind of went ahead and did that. I take that back. And also in the process, because this is going to be past 1990, mid 90s, late 90s, they were really pushing DeMonte, which is a fantastic area, but it's a beast in and of its own. But I want to go back real quick, just right back over there on Cortez Road, just north of Cortez Golf Course. There's a poor soul lying in the dirt who will be there for eternity with people driving around him. You've heard this story. Have I mentioned this?
I don't know that you've told me this.
Oh, okay. Well,
the audience hasn't heard it, so let's hear it again anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Many of the roads in the village make a horseshoe type. Okay. Kind of come in one side, out the other. Well, right. Cortez does the same thing. And right at 12 o'clock of Cortez, there's some townhouses, and you have a beautiful view of the 17th, 18th, of all the ponds and everything. But there's a grave in the middle of the road, literally in the middle of the road. Now, I sent you some video the other day about if you go out that Cortez gate, that's the middle fork of the Saline River, which is a protected waterway where we get our water from. Yep. And that river had flowed so high and had risen so high, they couldn't get this guy who had died when what was, just a farming community 50 or 70 years ago, whatever. They couldn't get him across the river to get him down to Jessieville to embalm him. So they buried him right there. Well, here's where a lot of interesting things come together. About 1978, Cortez is getting to be done. It's getting there. They're developing Asillo and Felicidad and some of these other subdivisions around that area, many of which are still unoccupied that aren't inside the golf course. Oh, and one other digression here. The first golf course was designed, and I'll remember his name, Tom Alt, but he was working with another company. And DeSoto is kind of a labyrinth, kind of fitted on top of itself, where you have to kind of go in and out and go in and out. When they got to Cortez, they decided it would make a figure eight. And the purpose of the figure eight is you could sell homes on the inside and on the outside. It doubled your effective surface area of the golf course, right? It's a genius idea.
Yep.
About 1977, 78, don't quote me on this, Mr. Cooper, who had been doing great here, his family lived on the lake down on this side, his mother lived on this side, they started a couple of churches here. It was really starting to take off. He got a phone call that said there was an enormous development in Northwest Arkansas, just outside Bentonville, that was about to go belly up. And so he thought, this may be a bird on the ground. I may need to go get this thing. Let's go see what we do. He went up to Bentonville, figured out where Bella Vista was going to be. They figured out where they could immediately put 2 golf courses. Now, the village is 26,064 acres, okay, roughly 41 square miles. But we are the largest singularly gated community in the world. There are other places that have more gates and smaller cells. But as far as one place, one time, one set of gates, where that's it. Well, he got to Bentonville and looked around and went, why would I put up a gate? Because there's nobody here, right? And number 2, he actually built it on either side of Interstate 49. So as you're driving through, one side is one golf course, one side's the other. And he started developing Bella Vista. He said, what does this have to do with the grave on Cortez? Seems as if the fine folks here in Hot Springs Village were looking around and going, we're going to finish this Cortez Road, but there's this dead guy in the middle of the road where we're supposed to put things. So they pull out the fax machine, spins up the drum. You younger kids won't know what we're talking about, will they, Randy? No. They spin up the drum, they fax it, and they said, this is the plot, this is the plat, these are the people that we found that we believe are related to this guy. Can we get a release? Can we get it? And they couldn't. They couldn't find anybody that would claim this guy. They were going to exhume him. They were going to take him down and bury him. There's a cemetery just over the river. And they were going to, rededicate him there. Can't do it. So they literally built the road around him. And in villager style, in my opinion, the women's club, garden club, and the men's garden club take care of him every year. He gets new fresh roses. He gets new fresh flowers. People come out and actually mind the grave at Cortez.
That's awesome. It's pretty interesting. Okay, now I got it. It's still on my mind. So Cooper is looking at this as kind of more of a fluent thing. I mean, he's courting, I'm guessing he's courting affluent people to come here to come and relax and recreate and do whatever they want to do. But I would assume that might include, in the early days, it might include the desire to hunt. So
could be.
Was that part of the sales pitch early on, or no?
Well, yeah.
If that's too minor of a point, then we can move on.
No. It's a great point. It's a great point, and it really does need to be addressed. And actually, I need to address the village security in just a moment, and I'll tie another story into that. Let me remind everybody that's watching that everybody that comes inside the village rides on a road that no taxpayers pay for. Zero. We have over 900 children that will hop on buses and ride to either Jessieville or Fountain Lake every day from this establishment for this facility. They get all of our tax dollars, and besides educating our children, we get nothing. They don't pick up trash. They don't do police. They don't do fire. All of your POA dues cover everything you see, lake maintenance, you name it, everything comes out of our POA dues. Now, when you understand that, you also understand that it's optional. For example, there used to be a sign up that said handgun law enforced. Well, do you know why it said handgun law enforced? Because we didn't have to. This could have been the world's largest open carry if we wanted to. This could still, within legal laws or whatever, this could be an open package container. It could be a million things. They do stock our ponds because typically the water is actually the property of Arkansas too. Yeah. Who knew, right?
Yeah.
But part of the scenario is that Cooper figured out early on they wanted to have control inside, but they would tell you, "Oh, you want to go hunting? Man, it's great hunting just down this way," and they're right. They're correct. They're exactly correct. What you have to understand is that in the early 70s, Cooper started what we see today, sans the buildings outside, the outbuildings or out parcels. But if you went this way, we went back east, you could go from here to Balboa and there wasn't anybody going to bother you because you're driving down a dirt road in the middle of nowhere and nobody knows if there's even going to be a subdivision. We don't even know if we're going to build it out. Okay. And as a POA, I'll remind you that if the village were to have tanked, Cooper could have gone, sorry. And there could have been massive POA fees charged to the owners, to the property owners who are basically in a commune of sorts, a financial commune, that we've got to pull ourselves out of this ditch. And that has never happened.
And do I understand correct? So from the West Gate to Balboa was the part that was really being sold. The rest had already been clear cut.
It was being clear cut in those years. It hadn't even, they kind of, when Cooper saw what had happened. Now, remember, he started working with Dirks and then he ended up working with Weyerhaeuser.
Right.
Well, Weyerhaeuser has a little shorter horizon than Dirks does. Dirks would come in and cut, and Mr. Dirks covers this in his book. They would selectively cut out the ones they wanted. And they didn't want only pine. They may have wanted some huge oaks or something like that, right, but they selectively cut it. When Weyerhaeuser came in, and they typically did this in the 90s, and it's roughly from Ponce de Leon-ish east. And that's where they had just simply made it a pine plantation, and every tree was a pine plantation. Not to say it's not beautiful. Yeah. In the fall, it's not as pretty to me in the fall.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So what's going on is that Cooper is managing Cherokee Village. They're growing Hot Springs Village and bringing people in as quick as they can. And this is one of the details I can't wait to share. And they're also developing Bella Vista. And at any point, this could have all collapsed, every part of it. But one of the scenarios is that they had different towns that they marketed to, and they would bring people in for a seminar, and they would give you a seminar and say, here's what it looks like, and here's the slideshow, and we're going to show the video, and the plane flies over the golf course, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you can come down for a visit, or you can buy today. That would be a great idea, right? Yeah. And they, at the end of it, the reason, the way they were able to get anybody there, virtually anybody there, is that they gave away a lot every seminar, every session. Oh. They would have a drawing, and you would get a platted deeded property in Hot Springs Village, Arkansas, and the $6 dues you're going to have to pay.
Yeah.
But they gave that to you they would give those away every time. That's how they kind of built up that. And anyway, as things developed, they would also say, you can hunt outside the village, you can fish here in the village, you can, whatever. Well, imagine this, Randy. I mean, I'm sitting here on Lake DeSoto. The next lake down is Lake Cortez. Next lake down from that, a little differently oriented, is Lake Lago, which is our water supply that we get out of the Middle Fork of the Saline River. But at the time when they're building that lake, the Lake Lago, there's nobody within a couple of miles. Hey, Randy, I got a great idea. Why don't you and me go down and we'll go fishing at the water supply? It was a completely different world 30 and 40 years ago because it was a completely different world. The
first lake was
DeSoto, where I'm sitting right now, and it comes out of Cedar Creek, and Cedar Creek runs on the north side of DeSoto Golf Course. So that it's basically got a feeder, and then there's a bowl. There's Benina behind us, and there's Toledo on the other side, and there's 1,000-acre bowl, and it generates a lot of water. In the last couple of days in particular, it generates a lot of water.
We've had monsoon, for those of you that are listening that aren't aware of this part of the country, including Texas.
Exactly. I'm looking right now. I've got 3.5 inches in the last 48 hours.
Yeah. Well, we haven't had quite that, but yeah, we're in the monsoon season, which we don't have here in Texas. But you have it more there. The first golf course was DeSoto. And once again, it was kind of a labyrinth, kind of on top of itself. Yeah.
And they had all these acres. They just didn't know how to use them yet, and they really did learn as they went. And I'll give you the statistics real quick, that there's 284 subdivisions now. There's 25% reserved in green space, not including golf courses, lakes, all that stuff. We talked about this the other day. As you drive down the main roads, you don't see any homes on the side because there's a green space buffer. It was actually modeled after Hilton Head, North Carolina. or South Carolina, I believe. Yeah.
Yep.
But it was actually, it was a master plan community. It was a master plan community that you didn't really realize was like any place else because you'd never been any place like that. You drove up a highway that was basically a modified logging road that went on up to Russellville, but you turned in what definitely was a logging road into where people had spent millions of dollars to get you there. And typically they would sell a lot between $3,000 and $5,000. They would finance it internally with Mr. Cooper. Oh, he had the Cooper finance. Duh. How did I forget that?
Right.
And then they usually would charge about 13% to 14% because you talk about marketing to the affluent, kinda. He was marketing to the new middle class.
People that wanted to be affluent.
Exactly. And one of the quotes that they attribute to Mr. Cooper is that he read a review when he was in West Memphis that within 500 miles of where he sat, which is Nashville and St. Louis and Branson, Silverdale, Little Rock, blah, 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 blah. Within 500 miles, somebody was retiring every 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And with that retiring, he made two comments to that. He said, instead of buying a gold watch factory, I decided to make a place where people could live better in retirement than they did in their regular life.
I like that.
I liked it too. I thought, and it played well, of course, because the bottom line is, Randy, you and me both, neither one of us sitting on either side of this microphone has 20 digits in the bank or whatever.
That's right.
We're all upcoming middle class that want to achieve. We just want the chance to work. A story many times tells a lot of other little stories. About 90, no, it would be in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002. There was a guy who was an attorney. He had bought a piece of property here in the village. And the village now in 2000, we're building on out to the east end. We've got Balboa, we've got Ponce, they've opened Magellan. They're working on Isabella and planning Granada. So, Mr. Alt, who designed all these, is really hopping. So it's opening up. You wouldn't call it a wilderness, past Lake Lago. On the backside of Lake Lago, you can stand up on Macero and look down on Lake Lago, and it's got the tremendous view of everything there. There's the dam, and that's our water supply, and I can tell you more stories about that too. But down behind that, if you stand from Macero and look down, you'll see there's a line of delineation going right across the dam and goes back that way toward Balboa, and this way goes, back to the western end of the village. And you don't think of anything about a line of delineation, except that line of delineation is also a line of delineation of pine trees and cedars, and yeah, you follow me? Uh-huh. Well, said attorney, who happened to be a POA member, decided he wanted to go hunting in those 300 acres down behind there. He takes his rifle, he takes his bow, he parks out in the middle of nowhere. I'm not going to tell you how to get there, but he drives from there, hikes back out in. Next thing you know, villagers are complaining that there's gunshots being fired in the village. Okay. So for those of you who didn't see that, I waved my hands in the air like it was a crisis. Okay. And I'm going to watch my words very carefully here.
Yeah, please do.
The security officers came and they told the attorney, you can't hunt here. This is POA land. And he said, I'm a POA member. And they said, you're breaking the law. And he said, no, I'm breaking your rule. And they said, we're going to arrest you. And he said, you're not a deputy. All of a sudden, the profile of the village and the idea that, and it was kind of Barney Fife and frankly, it was. We didn't need a lot of security there. For those of you that don't know, we went 39 years here in Hot Springs Village without one homicide. And the homicide, it's sad, but it was an elderly couple that one had terrible dementia. And she got very mad at her husband. She thought he had been cheating or something, and he hadn't. He was just a great guy. She actually threw an ashtray at him and unfortunately hit him in the head. He had a concussion, and died. But that was our first, in 37 years, that was the first one we had. So the issue I'm bringing up with the police force is in the next month, we rushed all of the security force to Saline County and we got them deputized. Yes, sir, Your Honor, I do. And we went to Garland County. We deputized them over there. So now they are true security officers, and they're actually police officers hired by a private corporation run by somebody who was not elected. Just let that settle in a while. Yeah. And by the way, you will never get me to say a foul word about Ricky Middleton, who there's nothing to say bad about. He's our police chief, one of the greatest guys. Last year, about this time, we had a pandemic episode, and the news blasted, "Pandemic stop short-term rentals." I read A through J, which said, unless they're medical, unless they're military, unless they're a journalist, unless they're all these other things. And I checked all my people out and confirmed, and we would still keep renting to those people because that was inside the law. But unfortunately, my neighbors hadn't read the law, so they called the police. And so I end up in front of Ricky Middleton going, "Ricky, the law says, here." And he's like, "Yeah, I know. So in a matter of one of my first meetings with him, in a matter of 20 minutes, not only had we resolved something, I had a new friend. I mean, he's a great small engine repair guy. He's fantastic. When I call him, I go, "Hey, Ricky, I think I got some gas in my gas tank. In my or some water in my gas tank." Yeah. He's like, "Oh yeah, Dennis, there's a little release nipple underneath there." And just anyway, who calls their police chief for small engine repair help?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. Well, you do.
Well,
but it does bring up a point. And for people like me, who I'm not currently a resident there, again, I'm a wannabe, but it's such an odd hybrid-ish kind of governance, for lack of a better word, that I'm completely unfamiliar with. I mean, I'm in way over my head to even try to remotely understand it. So it does bring up a point. So the POA was established, roughly a few years into the thing.
Probably 73 to 74.
Okay. And Cooper did that to relieve himself of these other issues that he didn't want to be bothered with. So is there anything that we should know about the establishment of that and how he set that up? I mean, because the charter, some of these things, they go back a long, long time. And it seems to me as an outsider, some of those things, yeah, they should be revisited. Maybe not. It's up to the people that have made an investment there. I've made an investment in renting from people like you short term. So I'm certainly not going to cast a verbal vote about it, but come on, let's face it. Something that was established 45 years ago might be subject to a bit of modification.
It could, and one of the pieces that I meant to bring up earlier, and by the way, to whomever is listening or watching, and sincerely thank you, we live in a headline society, and it causes a lot of confusion. If you're listening and watching right now, you want to hear the rest of the story or the deeper story, and I A, applaud you, B, thank you, and I'm about to give you the rest of the story. The POA and Cooper was a very symbiotic relationship until 2006. In 2006, Cooper said, "We're not going to develop any more properties," although they still could. They could do that today, and they do not have to be aligned, or they do not have to be touching the village for them to align. If they wanted to build something on the other side of the concrete plant, that's up to them. If they wanted to build something in Benton, they could do that. That's completely up to them. They are the developer. And once again, I give them kudos. Hey, I've never made a city in the middle of the national forest before. Good luck, right? Good on you. That whole thing said, when in 2006, when there was that separation, when the POA basically had to kind of stand on its own two legs, it wasn't just the problem solver anymore. A lot of people said, "Oh my God, now we've got to market through the POA," which has been on and off again, failure and success and mixed and whatever. But the problem is that those bylaws and the charter that you're talking about was set up to be symbiotic. We leaned on each other. Well, there's nobody here to lean on anymore. Okay. And that's what's been, if you, at its core, if you look back on the last 10 years, 14 years of POA strife, the POA has had to try to identify itself as a resort marketing association? Is it just a POA for maintenance? Is it a growth environment? I'm sorry.
What? Yeah. The question is that they're asking is, what are we?
Mm-hmm.
And trying to answer that. Oh, so back up. So 2006, what exactly happened?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, Cooper, and I'll say this out loud and they'll say the same thing. They were the very first people to fall on their own sword and go, whoops, that was us. We did that. And yes, they made mistakes that I can point them to you. There's misnamed roads. Anyway, they made mistakes.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. Everybody makes mistakes. But Cooper was smart enough to know that in 2006, they were watching the residential home market just go nuts. And they were like, this is not sustainable. This is unfundamental. It's not based on fundamentals. We're out. To try and save our own skin, to save everything, okay. We're out. And when they backed out of home sales, which everybody was just stunned, they kept their commercial property in Little Rock. They own a lot of commercial property in Little Rock. I had the third largest IT company in the state. I paid them a big check every month because I was on Bowman and Markham in West Little Rock, downtown West Little Rock, you would say. And I paid them every day or every month. And they still own a tremendous amount of real estate there. But on the residential side, they were like, we're out.
Now, by 2006, had they already been historically tapering off their construction inside the village?
Yes and no. You got to understand, 2006, they had just opened Granada, which was a gangbusters. Oh my God. And I have pictures of they grew in Granada for an entire year before they let anybody play golf on it.
And we're 2 years before the big real estate.
Oh yeah.
Debacle.
Oh yeah. So
2006.
They could see the future and they saw where it was going, and wise enough for them. Now, I usually don't cover this, and this is a big deal. The POA board, which, let me back up one step. By charter, by the original bylaws, is a volunteer group. We have people that pay thousands of dollars to be elected to be on the board, to take verbal abuse, to get nothing, not one dime. So, I've asked repeatedly, why don't we have a board of directors that gets paid? If you paid me and you wanted me on the board of directors, it's something I would entertain.
And for people that don't understand, so to be on the board, you are elected. You are, yes. In essence, you are an elected official to be a board member. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then the board appoints, hires, whatever you want to use the word, the general manager or who was the CEO or the leader. So the POA has established this policy that we're going to set over here, and here will be the leader of the POA, and here will be all the ordinance under them, and we tell them what to do. We don't try and go micromanage everybody down the food chain.
Yep.
Which has been a problem here and there, but I'm not going to.
Well, and as you know, and I'll tell the audience, I do a considerable amount of work with city government here in the state of Texas. And the analogy that I would make, correct me if I'm wrong, just to make sure that I've got a clear picture. So here in Texas, you've got a mayor who's elected, but who also sits on a board, which in essence is a city council, 7 people, 4 votes. Got to have 4 votes, obviously, to get anything done. 4 people have to agree. They are all elected officials. They hire a city manager. City manager is not an elected official. City manager is not making policy. City manager is basically carrying out what the board wants or the council wants. The council doesn't really get involved in the nitty-gritty details of how it's getting done. It's up to that city manager, who's also got a legal team, and they're going to do everything by the law, and they're carrying forth the marching orders of the city council. Similar, different?
Could not be more accurate. And that is exactly the case, except many times the board in a larger city may be a paid position.
Oh, correct.
And let me go back. And obviously the general manager would be, but let me go back. We have never, ever in 51 years, we have never had a paid director, because Cooper wrote that initially into the charter that you can't be paid. And listen, 25 years ago in the middle 90s, when we had the big golden parachute boom and whatever, they were still meeting and roughly rubber stamping whatever Cooper asked. So it didn't take 3 hours a month.
Yeah.
Now there's 5 meetings a week. And right. Now you got to, we're trying to work with the marketing. We've turned the POA into a different beast, or we're trying to. And as you know, Randy, city government, yep. Which it effectively is, that's a hard thing to change.
Yeah. Well, it's turning a battleship.
Yeah. Literally. Yeah, literally is. But as Cooper was building in 2006, they kind of stepped back and said, we're not going to do this anymore. Okay. In 2004, and let me back up, Cooper quit building properties they quit platting out new properties probably in 2004, 2005. And Eric Estrada.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, NRPI. And I think it's the Fowler brothers. There's a couple of brothers that actually did this, but they came in and they called themselves redevelopers.
Yeah.
And the POA at that time had 700 lots that they could not get rid of. We now have 3,800. Yeah, but we're selling those as fast as we can. But my point being, at the time, it was, oh, Lord, what are we going to do with these 700 lots? And they sold them to NRPI out of California, out of Irvine, California. And they came in, did commercials, remarketed the area. They called themselves redevelopers. Yeah. And once again, they flew you in for free. They put you up at the Camelot in Little Rock. They brought you down on a bus and pulled down the shades, and you watched the movie all the way down. And when you got here, they said, isn't this glorious? Well, it ought to be. You were looking at the lampshade for the last 5 hours or the last hour, right? And a lot of people bought. A lot of people bought because at that time, there was always that disparity in your mind, and the number one question, Randy, what would this lot cost you in Atlanta? You're not in Atlanta, but they would sell them and they kept doing it. Well, NRPI started doing the same thing. They bought the first 500 lots. They bought the 700 lots for $500 a piece and a year's suspension of dues, which comes out to about $600, $650 an acre. Yeah. Let that sink in. Yeah. And as I told when I was on another board at that time, a smaller board, and I said, you guys didn't offer me that deal. And they were like, well, you weren't going to redevelop us, Yeah. Well said. That's a good point.
Now, was the whole place platted at this point? So
exactly.
By the time you get to 2004, the whole place is platted.
It's platted and it's run by another developer. So if NRPI had bought 500 lots that were all contiguous and they wanted to turn it into an amusement park, they couldn't have, because Cooper would have to rubber stamp that they would have to replat everything.
Yeah.
And then Cooper would have to rubber stamp and sign off on that. Well, if Cooper didn't want to do that, or if there wasn't enough money in it, didn't do it. I can't say it. I blame them. Right. So they called themselves a redeveloper. I think a lot reseller would probably have been a better term.
Yeah.
They did at the moment, as I said in a blog this last week, they blew up the market. People that had interior lots on an unpaved road in the middle of nowhere that were trying to sell theirs for $1,000 were getting letters in the mail that said, we'll buy your lot for $8,000. And they were like, yes, this is what we're looking for. And about the time they started buying that, the end was near, right? But one of the things, and I wanted to come back, there was something I meant to mention. Oh, whoa. 2006 POA board members. Not too much after that. Cooper came in after they had left, per se, actively. And they came to the board as the crisis was coming down on everybody. And they said, you owe us these funds. And it would be like access funds or water funds, or we built this and you didn't reimburse us. And we owe you. And so here's what we propose. We propose that we will do a swap of these owed funds, and we will give you these properties in the village. We'll give these to the POA, and you will agree to pave all the roads we haven't paved and run the utilities, water, power, sewer, lights, cable, everything to those facilities we haven't paved yet in lieu of this. Now, I don't know if you realize what a Faustian bargain that could or could not have been. Jeff, a friend of mine, was on the board at that time, and his comment was, we did not know if they were going to survive another month. So a swap versus a bankruptcy that leaves us all going, well, I thought you owned that piece of land. Well, no, I want to make my driveway wider, and now I don't have a developer to talk to. I mean, in a way it made sense.
Sure.
But there's about 22 miles of the village, of the 500 miles of the village. There's about 20 to 22 miles that have not been paved, and the POA is responsible for that too. So I wanted to share how that came about and how we got to there.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, listen, the place, given that story and that background, it's even more remarkable, isn't it? I mean, that it is today. That it is today. I don't know if it's what Cooper envisioned or not, but it's a success for sure. I mean, we had an interview with Greg, who came from Dallas, and he said it in that interview, and it of course resonated with me because that's currently where I'm sitting in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, and it's the closest drive to not see a place that looks like Texas. But given everything that now the village is, and even what it hopes to become, I mean, what a success, because I love the place.
Well, you know what, if you don't love the place, if you even hate the place, you still have to respect the people and the time and the energy and the estimation. And Mr. Dirks covers this in his book. It's estimated that Cooper put in over $1.2 billion worth of infrastructure, housing, roads, everything in here. Okay. You got to admire that. I mean, really. And once again, this place was nowhere. And I tell you what, there's a point we're skipping over because I'm trying to envision the residents that are watching this or listening to this and the non-residents.
That's right.
And let's cover an issue real quick. Right now, and it may change a little, but it won't change a lot anytime soon. But right now, a POA due, an assessment is the technical name for what your POA dues are. A POA in Dallas may be several hundred a month, a couple hundred a month.
Oh yeah, I would say at a minimum, if you're in a community, that operates like that.
Yeah, our dues are $39 a month. That feeds the police, the fire department, the ambulance, the roads, the sewer, the water, the lights, you name it. Now, that said, if you own a home that has a water meter, what home wouldn't have a water meter? It's $69. Either way, I'm going to give a number that I've shared a dozen times, Randy, and I know you've probably heard it. Outside the West Gate is 88% of the national crime rate, which is okay. That's not bad. Outside the East Gate, about 18 miles away, is 86% of the national crime rate. Where I'm sitting right now is 13.2% of the national crime rate. That's something like 4 standard deviations. If you know anything about math, it's virtually, anyway, I don't need to sell it, Randy. You know the story.
Yeah.
Do I lock my doors?
Non-existent.
Yeah, it's not
for all
existent.
intents and purposes.
Well, Sheriff Middleton says we have every crime that they have in a major city. We just don't have as many of them.
Yeah, and I would even argue with that, but he's an expert, so he would probably know better than me.
He has a point. You have a point. You have a point.
I mean, you're gonna have drugs and all the consequences that go along with that. Anywhere that you've got any group of people, large or small, but it's a fantastic place. I love it so, which was the genesis of this whole podcast, because I just really wanted to shine a light on it. I really wanted to learn more about it, the history, and I'm a history buff, so the history is important. If you weren't into this, then, well, that's what podcasts are for. You can hit stop, or you can fast forward. But I'm sure there's other details that we can come back to in future episodes. And I want to put a shout out to the audience and thank you. We're really early on. Dennis and I are, we're gonna find our rhythm and work out what few kinks we've got. We're on every major podcast platform there is, and frankly, some that are way not major. But whatever your favorite podcast catcher is, we're there. The website is hsvinsideout.com. Hot Springs Village insideout.com takes you to the same place. We're going to try to populate the website. We're currently moving our hosting as we're recording this. By the time you watch this or listen to this, we'll have already gotten that done. So we're going to try to populate it with even non-podcast things, articles and so forth. Dennis will be putting some stuff. He's the resident expert here. I appreciate the history lesson. I appreciate what the predecessors have done. Take us out, but do it by giving us just some of the bullet point features of the place for people that may be unfamiliar. Some of the key stats about the place, now that we know that it was a place that was just dirt road and a bunch of trees.
It really was. And Randy, once again, I have to tell you thanks. As a techie, many of the things you've been doing for this podcast show, I usually am burdened with, and thank you, Jesus, that Randy is taking care of such things. It allows me the time to pontificate about lakes and mailings and such. Anyway, yeah, I'll tell you what, I love quoting the stats, and I'm good with the stats. That's not a big deal. But the stats, as you know, Randy, just don't do it justice. It really doesn't. 26,000 acres, 26,063 acres, 284 subdivisions, 9 golf courses, 11 lakes. Everything, every property touches or is adjacent to is covered by green space. There's green space everywhere, intentionally just for that. And I think I might have mentioned this in one of our other podcasts. A lot of times we name places Rolling Oaks. Well, that's what was there before we bulldozed it flat and put in sewer systems. And, that's not how the village is. It's very pristine, very wood-like. If you're interested in a wooded area, this is the place. The typical lot, an interior lot inside the village probably would go for $4,000 these days. And you can have and I call it the I want to be left alone lot. Where you can be at the end of the road, as you talked about staying at one of those, Randy, where I love Abraham Lincoln's quote. He said he didn't mind having neighbors as long as he couldn't see the smoke from their fire.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of alone places here in the village that you don't know unless you pull them up on a map and look at it.
And every lot in there, correct me if I'm wrong, every lot is buildable.
Every lot. Well, man, I'm glad you said that. Yeah, this is a common misconception. Mr. Cooper, an attorney, wasn't too prone to being sued. He didn't care much for that. So one of the things he would do is that when Jeff, my business partner, has a lot that is 5.3 acres. I'm not even going to tell you where we're at, but it's 5.3 acres. You know how many goats you could get on 5.3 acres? You know how many homes you can get on 5.3 acres?
A lot.
One.
Yeah,
no, one.
Here. Right.
One. Because what he did is that, why do you make it 5 acres instead of 1 acre? Why? Because there's only one good home site. So when people say, oh, you've got one of those unbuildable lots, there's no such thing. In the village, there is no such thing.
Okay, well, see, I didn't know that. So the 5.3 is because there's only one real ideal place to build a house on there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And many times there's...
Well, because people are still arguing about, well, how come I got a third of an acre and they've got 5 point and they're paying the same? Okay, well, I get it. That makes sense. I didn't know that.
I had a group of investors come in 2007, and they flew in from Atlanta. They had been on an overnight. They were all completely worn out, and they wanted me to show them lots, literally, that were right across the street from the POA. And I said, okay. And they were like, yeah, we'll take like 10 or 12 of them. And I'm like, what do you mean? Well, just line them up and we'll just take like this street. No, this street sold 30 years ago. And there might be 3 or 4 properties on these 12 that are available. And they envisioned that everything was square, just like it was in Florida.
Right.
X, Y, 80 foot, 120, 8 foot, 120, 8 foot. And I'm like, there's probably no 2 lots in the village that are like that. And we're diving deep. We're going really deep. Let me tell you the inside here. A lot of complaints have been that when they were building the west side, a 3rd acre lot seemed normal. That was what you would get in a subdivision, right? But most subdivisions were square and X by Y, right?
Yep.
Well, as we started building out to the middle, center, and particular, even on the east, Cooper was still using some of those same criteria for the sizes. Well, now if you want to build a larger house and you want a double garage or even a triple garage, you end up having to build an L on that half acre because you can't get it on a 3rd acre and you can't have a drive-through. Anyway, it made for it made for a lot of houses that the front fascia had a garage door. Right?
Interesting.
And if that looked cookie cutter to you, it's because it's cookie cutter, right?
Yeah.
But that's one of the complaints they've been having. Jeff and I have been buying doubles and even triples, and you can call Cooper and recombine those back together. You would have 3 payments or, whatever.
Yeah, right.
But the bottom line is that you could have contiguous land, but those are so rare these days. I mean, 32,000 home sites, 32,283 home sites, 19% occupied roughly throughout the entire village, about 80% vacant. And that's one of the things. It's quiet at night, Randy. I mean, it is quiet as a tomb, isn't it?
Yep.
And one of the things that I had to turn around because the lighting just wouldn't support it. But when we're looking back over the lake, which is that way, Just over that other side and on the other side there is part of the national forest, 1.7 million acres, and part of the 225,000 wilderness acres. And it's dark. I mean, it's profoundly dark. And on late summer evenings, you see the Magellanic Cloud, which basically is the solar system on edge. And there are billions of stars, billions. And you say, well, I never saw that before. You were never in the woods in the dark without light pollution.
Exactly.
It's a pristine place in many ways. And Randy, I cannot tell you thank you enough. Seriously, I appreciate. Personally, I'm not going to mention any names, but I had a very, very prominent realtor I talked to yesterday tell me that she saw what we were doing. It was improving the name and the reputation of the village, and she really appreciated it. She had people calling and asking about it. There's a compliment. Yeah, there's a compliment, my friend.
Well, that's what we hope to do. Again, the website is hsvinsideout.com. Our tagline, I guess, tells you everything you need to know. It's a place, or it's a podcast where Hot Springs Village, Arkansas is the star. Dennis he's a good steward and kind of a custodian in resident. I'm just a guy in Texas who hopes to get there one day and spend some time there. So I love it. Appreciate you saying yes to the podcast. I hope you got something out of it. The listeners, if you don't subscribe yet to the podcast, please do that. And the greatest thing that you can do for us is tell a friend about it. I'm going to give you the last words, Dennis. Take us out.
I tell you what, I'm going to tell you that, boy, I didn't see this one coming.
It's all right.
Yeah, I'm fine. I just didn't see it coming. I think that everybody ought to have something they're appreciative for. If you don't think you have enough things in your life, it's because you're not thankful for the things you do have.
Amen. Yeah.
And we literally, and I apologize for the crackle in my voice, but we literally thank Jesus. We thank the Lord above that we get to live in a place like this. Because it's not that there's no troubles and there's no stress and strife and there's no crime. And of course there is. That's everywhere. But when everybody you talk to is a nice person, you come out and you've had a bad day, or you've been struggling with something at work or struggling with something in your family, and you come out and your neighbor goes, hey, boy, I love those gardenias. It looks really beautiful. Boy, your yard's really pretty this year. That noise, Randy, that noise.
Yeah. Well, that's been my best description of the whole thing.
Yeah. So if you want to,
the minute I get in the car and head that way, I'm exhaling. Then the minute I pull through the gate, I'm exhaling again. And the minute I pull into wherever it is we're staying, yeah, it's a big exhale.
And if you're looking for some exhale time like that, and people say, well, I don't know that we can afford to move and we can't change our life, that's fine. Just come visit. There's a guy on Gold Rush, an old guy named Fred Hurt, who has a boot. He's got a boot 6 inches higher on one side than the other. He's a tough old Henri cuss. You know exactly who I'm talking about. And he said something that just hit me right between the eyes during the pandemic. And he said, I'm 83 and I'm still diving in this cold water in Alaska. I'm still diving and I'm making great memories. Because at my age, that's all you've got.
Yep.
And I thought, yep, it is. I mean, and that's why I'm saying, please just come visit. If you need a respite, if you need a decompression zone, we're the place.
Randy, in the footer of the website is an encouragement for those of you that haven't visited, those of you that have and want to keep visiting, to go to Airbnb, go to VRBO, just plug in Hot Springs Village. Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. And I mean, there are some great places in there that are affordable for any budget. There are places like Dennis has on the lake that are also ridiculously affordable. I do a few event things every now and again, and did a deal with a chain hotel here in Dallas. Nothing special, just a regular run of the mill, kind of a off the highway hotel, continental breakfast, $100 a night. You can go to Hot Springs Village and spend $100 a little north, a little south. And I mean, trust me, it's money. It's money well spent.
$100 will get you a house on the lake.
Yeah.
It really will. And then that's no exaggeration. And people are like, you got to be crazy. I'm like, no. I know a place that's $75 a night on the golf course. So, and by the way, while we're plugging, if you don't mind, ddvillageprop.com, DD as in Dennis and Diana, myself and my lovely wife, villageprop.com. We have 4 Airbnb rentals. We are booked out. What is this? This is June. We're nearly completely booked through September, but all our units are lakefront. All our units have hot tubs. All our units have kayaks for your use. All our units are pet friendly and on this same lake. You can see why we are booked out till September.
Yeah, but you can also see a live webcam too.
Oh yeah, ddvillageprop.com as the lake cam. I'm actually looking at it right now.
Yep, it's awesome. Thanks for listening, everybody. We had a little trouble dismounting today, but it's okay. It's all good because we love the place so much, and I hope it came through to you. All right, thanks, Dennis. See you next time.
Thanks, Randy. Good seeing you, bud.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Hot Springs Village Inside Out, a podcast where Hot Springs Village, Arkansas is the star. Please subscribe to the podcast. You can do that by visiting our website, hsvinsideout.com, and tell a friend.